Welcome, Captain Moto here. Thanks for dropping in. Hey, I'm no expert. I'm just a guy splaining stuff. You know, sometimes things look pretty complicated, and you wish you had some clarity. Hey, I try to make it simple. I'm just a guy splaining stuff. Let's dive in. Welcome to Splain'n Reverb and Delay. You know, these two effects are the most commonly used in audio production. And as a matter of fact, we hear reverb every day, everywhere in our environment. And we hear it in almost all modern recordings. But when it comes time for us to use reverb and delay, do we really understand it? Do we know how to apply it? And do we even understand the difference between the two? I'll try to explain it. I think the easiest way to think about this before we go too deep is this. Think about repeats and reflections. Reverb is the sound we hear when sound bounces off of surfaces and we get reflections. And delay is a repeat of a sound. So if you keep that in mind as we move forward, try to think of those two principles. Reverb is reflections, and delay is repeats. Here we go. Reverb and delay, as it applies to audio effects, are referred to as time-based effects. Why? Because they manipulate the sound over time. There are other time-based effects such as chorus, flanger, and phaser, but for the purposes of this demonstration, we'll be focusing on reverb and delay. Let's start out by a simple concept of an echo. Think of a simple echo. We hear the original sound, and then at some point later in time, we hear the echo. That second sound is called a repeat. And that's what delay does. It takes the sound and it repeats it. Reverb, on the other hand, is the sound we hear when the original sound is bounced off of one or two or multiple surfaces, and as it reflects, our ears hear it at different times. And then additionally, those reflections bounce off of other surfaces like the ceilings, the floor, opposite walls, and the combination of all those reflections creates a myriad of sounds that we call reverb. The size, the distance, the texture of the surfaces in our environment all reflect the sound in different ways. Our ears collect those sounds, bouncing off all those various surfaces, and our brain interprets what type of environment we're in. As an example, we all have different kinds of reflective surfaces in our homes. Hey, think of a tile bath. Maybe you sing in the shower, right? Or maybe you're humming a lullaby to an infant in the nursery. One of those environments is very reflective with hard surfaces, and the other is not. It has less reflective surfaces like a bedroom with carpeting, soft bedding that absorbs the sound, and we get less reverb. Remember, reverb is reflections. So if we have a hard surface, we get more reflections. A soft surface absorbs some of the sound, and we get less reflection. Outside of our home, every space we go into has some kind of reflection and reverb. Large spaces like churches and auditoriums have more distance between the spaces and sometimes more surfaces that reflect the sound and make the space sound bigger. Why? Why does it sound bigger? It sounds bigger because the reflection takes longer. It's traveling a further distance before it bounces back to us. And consequently, our brains interpret that as space, as a bigger environment. As we become washed in the reflections in very reflective spaces, the sounds that we hear first are called early reflections. The sounds that hit us later are called late reflections. These are terms that are often applied and used in the artificial reverb we use when we're making audio productions. Another element is called decay. As the sounds bounce around and travel distances, they lose energy and their volume starts to decay. That's a term that we'll also hear when we're learning about how to control artificial reverb. Not only will the size and the shape of a room impact how it sounds, but other things such as humidity and the number of people in the room will change what's called the reflectivity. Yes, people absorb sound. So having said that, one of the most common uses of reverb is to artificially create the sound of music in a particular space. Oftentimes that's called room reverb. It could be a small room, a large room, an auditorium, a cavern. Those are all ways that the controls on a reverb can manipulate the time element of those reflections to create the illusion of our sound being in a particular space. So remember, reverb is the cumulative sound of multiple reflections hitting our ears at different times. So when we start doing demonstrations of reverbs, we will see a number of controls that we can manipulate to change how the sound, the reflections decay, whether it's a large room, a small room, how tall it is, how reflective it is, how damp it is, whether it's populated with people or not, and all of those elements have an impact on how we perceive that sound. We'll be diving into reverb first, but just before we leave this introductory section, I want to mention that we need to keep in mind those two principles. Reverb is reflections, and those reflections can be from multiple surfaces. On the other hand, delay is a repeat, and it's just one sound that's repeated multiple times. And we'll touch on that more as we move ahead. So let's dive a little deeper into reverb. As I said, one of the most common uses of reverb is to recreate a space. So visualize a band playing. Do we want that band to be in a small room or at a large auditorium? Okay? Another way that we can use reverb is to move the sound of a particular instrument forward or backwards in the mix. The way we manipulate the reverb on any particular instrument can force it to sound like it's further and further away, consequently being further and further back in the mix. Various types of what I'll call room reverbs might include such thing as a hall, which is a large space with lots of reflective surfaces, a room reverb of various sizes with perhaps less reflective surfaces, and then something called a chamber. And a chamber, as we know it today, is a reproduction or a digital reproduction of what was used years ago by audio engineers to try to artificially create a reverberated space where they would actually put speakers in a very reflective room, play the audio into those speakers, and then record it as that sound bounced around the room. We really don't need to do that anymore because now we have all these digital tools we could use. Additionally, another type of reverb would be called a plate. Here again, this was an attempt of early engineers to try to artificially create reverb by sending the sound across a large metal plate. Digitally, we can recreate those plate reverbs as well, and we'll talk about that a little later on. And then a lot of guitar players will be familiar with something called a spring reverb. That was a relatively cheap way to create the reverb effect inside of a guitar amplifier by putting various springs in there, and that delayed the sound in various ways to create the artificial reverb we're familiar with in guitar amplifiers. So to wrap that up, generally speaking, we want to use reverb to recreate a particular environment, or we want to use it as a special effect to push something backward in a mix, or to create some excitement, or to make something sound larger or perhaps more exciting. In just a moment, we're going to do a few examples of reverb on a guitar with different types of songs, and then we'll explore using reverb on various elements of a mix. We'll also look at using a combination of multiple reverbs and a very common use where we apply reverb and delay together. You know, oftentimes people have a difficult time grasping compression, and if you want to know a little more about that, please check out my video on compression. But many people see reverb and delay as a pretty simple tool, a pretty simple effect to apply, but in reality, it can be pretty complicated if you want to do it right, and reverbs and delays can be used in many more less obvious ways to manipulate the sound or to be applied on your mix in ways you wouldn't traditionally think of doing. So we're going to jump into those examples shortly, and then I'll walk you through what I'm going to call a remix of one of my songs, and we'll apply different reverbs and different delay tools to show how we can use that in a mix. So before we go there, I'm going to take just a 5-second break, and I'm going to ask you to please consider subscribing. Leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Ring the bell to get notifications of my next video coming out. And if you're getting anything special out of this, please consider looking for the link below to buy me a coffee. Thanks. On we go. Well, those last two examples were pretty dramatic on the extreme side of using reverb and delay. Certainly appropriate for those songs and in that genre, but I'm thinking for most of the stuff the average person is doing, you're going to use something a little more subtle. And that's what I'm going to be demonstrating next with a simple chord progression. In all these instances, I'm using a Telecaster-style guitar into a good cell tube amplifier which is mic'd with an RE20 dynamic microphone. I'm using the built-in reverb on the amplifier, and when I kick it in, I'm using a TC Electronic flashback delay. So we'll walk through a few examples. The first one here is going to be the amp dry. Now the same amp with the amp's reverb turned on. Now, no reverb, just delay. Now, this delay actually sounds a little like reverb. Why? I'll explain that a little later on. Now, we've got the amp with the delay and reverb. In that last instance, I'm sending the delay pedal into the built-in reverb, so we have two effects in series. This is going to be called parallel, and I'm using the digital reverb and delay here, and here's what it looks like. We've got the delay on one side and the reverb on the other going in to the recording. Previously, we had the delay going into the reverb into the amp, but in this instance, we're able to use this splitter inside Studio One. So we take the signal, it goes here to the first pedal, which is the delay. On the other side, it goes to the reverb. So they're both being recorded simultaneously. That's called parallel. Let's see what it sounds like. Now, it can't be difficult to describe the difference, but to my ear, the parallel sounds cleaner. It gives each of the effects its own path. I think we understand reverb and delay, but it's hard to describe the difference between one into the other. Remember the principles. Reverb is reflections, delay is repeats. We can repeat a sound, or we can repeat a reflected sound. Or we can reflect a repeat. Sounds confusing, but just train your ears to detect the differences. Let's listen again. Earlier I said the delay sounded like reverb. Let's see why. We'll visit the controls, and we have a number of types of delays. We won't work on that now. We'll focus on the three basic controls. This is the time control. How quickly or slowly does the repeat happen? Then we have how many repeats will occur. Is it one, two, or multiple repeats? And then finally, just a level. How much of that repeat do we want to hear? So now with that basic knowledge of how the controls work on a delay, how is it that we can make it sometimes sound a little more like reverb? Well, I think it's obvious if we have a single or one or two repeats and they're spaced out, there's no doubt we recognize that as a repeat coming out of a delay. However, if we manipulate the controls on a delay with a fast repeat, and then we have a long feedback, so that repeat repeats and repeats and repeats over and over, then it starts to sound like a reverb giving us multiple reflections. Let's hear what that sounds like. So, a lot of people will ask, what's the right order to put these in? Delay first, reverb later? You know the answer. There is no right or wrong way. After all, this is an artistic endeavor we're engaged in. And you, as the artist or the creator or the mixer, you have to determine what effect suits the need for the production that you're creating. After all, let's look back at some of the great artists. Let's look at Picasso. Does anybody think this looks like a woman we've ever met? No. It was his artistic approach to presenting his paintings to the world in his view, and we know his popularity. So, use your own ears, use your own creativity to apply reverb and delay in any way you want. If it sounds good to you, then it's the right way. So do what sounds good to you, but I'll leave you with one tip. If you're using delay, it sounds best if you time it to the tempo of the song. So if you're using a delay inside your DAW and it has a sync, use that. If not, in the notes below, you'll find a link to a delay time calculator. That's it. Righty, we're in the DAW, and in this case, I'm using Studio One Pro version 7, and I'll be using a song that I've previously recorded and released. It's out there on all the streaming services, and what I've done is gone back to the mix, stripped out all of the time-based effects, and now we're going to test out applying those here while I demonstrate what's happening. Here's a little bit of what it sounds like. This is all dry. Come on down. All right, let me mute all that. I'm sitting here all alone. And I'll tell you how I've got this session laid out. We start out with a drum track. This is a drum bus. All the drums are on this particular track. We've got a bass, an acoustic guitar. We've got two rhythm guitars. I'm calling them right and left. We've got a Telecaster style guitar playing some leads and fill type instrumentation. We've got a main vocal and then backing vocals. All of those tracks roll up into these buses. So I've got a drum bus, bass bus, acoustic, rhythm bus, tele bus, and a vocal bus. And these buses then are fed over to these effects channels, and I'll walk you through how this is all set up, and we'll demonstrate the effects of these particular time-based effects on each track and then on the mix. So let's start with the drums. Here they are, dry. And what I want to do is add a little bit of reverb, so I'm adding a room reverb to that. That is being sent over here to the room reverb effects channel. So let me turn that off. Back on. You can hear. Now I want all or most of the entrants to be placed in the same room. So now we're going to go and pull up the bass bus. There it is, dry. I'm going to send the bass to get some room reverb. But I've set up a separate bass reverb effects channel. I've put in there the same room reverb, but it gets a little woofy. Wait till the song starts again and I'll demonstrate what I'm talking about. There's just too much bass woofing around there. So what I've done in this effects channel called bass reverb is I have the room reverb, which is the same room reverb I'm sending the drums to, but I've copied it to this channel, and now I'm going to apply an EQ to it. And what I'm doing is I'm preventing all of the really low end of the bass from actuating the reverb. So let me turn that on and off. Just too much bass bouncing around, not a very good sound. So when I apply the EQ to the reverb, not to the bass, just to the reverb on the bass, it tames it and just gives it enough reverb to make it interesting. I've cut out all the low end. I made a little boost here. Where am I here? Oh, about 475 kilohertz, just a little bump. And then I've lifted also the high end here to give it a little more so you can hear some of the click reverberating in the bass. Let me turn that off and listen again. I'm going to mute the drums. You hear that? Too much reverb. I'll put the EQ on the reverb. So you could hear it. It's in the room, but it's not overpowered with the reverb. Okay? So we'll add the drums back in. The next instrument is the acoustic. I'll let you hear that solo. I want this acoustic to be in the same room with the other instruments, so I'm sending it over to this room reverb where all the other instruments are being fed. Let me turn that on and off. Oh, phooey. We gotta wait for the song to start. Here we go. That's dry acoustic sent to the room reverb. Now we'll bring in the bass and the drums. They're all playing nicely in the same room except for the bass, where I've put this EQ on the room reverb. To me, sounds pretty decent. Let's stop there and we'll pick up the next few instruments as we proceed. Okay, we're on to the next instrument, and in this case, what we'll be looking at is the rhythm guitar. So we'll be messing with this rhythm bus, and this rhythm bus is being fed by two rhythm guitars. And during the tracking, the way this was captured was this is one guitar going into two different amplifiers with two different microphones. And then I took these tracks and I panned one right and one hard left. The next thing I did was I wanted these to be very wide in the mix, and I didn't want them to be too prominent. I wanted them to sit back in the mix because the acoustic guitar is really playing a very prominent role here, and I didn't want the acoustic guitar in conflict with the rhythm guitars. So what I did was, one, I wanted them wide, so I panned them right and left. Then I'm sending them over to a couple of effects channels. And on these effects channels, what I've done is I've put the same room reverb that we used previously, same room configuration. It's a small hall. I think this is the default setting for small hall. So I've got that room reverb set up on what I'm calling reverb right. And what's happening is I'm taking the rhythm guitar, which is panned left, and I'm sending it to the reverb panned right. So we have a dry guitar panned left. That same guitar is going to the effects channel, which has reverb on it, the room reverb, and that's panned to the right. Then I do the opposite. I take the dry guitar, which is panned right, you see it here, and I send it over to this effects channel, which is panned left. So in both instances, we have the dry going to one side and the wet being only the reverb going to the opposite side. Then those two effects channels are ultimately feeding this rhythm bus here. So we're going to jump ahead over here and we're going to give it a listen. Okay, let's listen to what we've got here. So I'm going to turn these effect room reverbs off. So hear what those two guitars sound like, dry, panned left and right. And I kick those room reverbs back on. And you see it gets a lot wider. Like I said, I wanted this to sit back in the mix. So let's introduce the previous instruments. Let's put the drums back in. Let's put the bass in. Let's put the acoustic in. As you can hear, that acoustic plays a pretty prominent role. Let me drop these this rhythm bus out. I put it back in. You see it just adds a little more depth to it. Sitting back in the mix with the widespread and the opposite room reverb on each. Okay, now we'll go on to the next instrument. Okay, now we're going to address the next instrument, which is the Tele style guitar. And my intention with this is to really make this Telecaster sound like it's coming from a different space, to have a lot more ambience, an ethereal kind of a vibe on it. While the other instruments are all in a single room, configured as a hall, I want this Telecaster to be like it's coming from another space. Think of maybe a church choir loft or something like that. So let's hear what it sounds like dry. Now I'm going to kick in this room reverb. And in this instance, rather than using the same size room as I did on the others, I've selected this preset called Church. And then what I did is I adjusted the size of the room to really make it big. So we get a lot of reverberance. I have zero population, so it's not absorbing any of that. High degree of reflectivity and a low degree of dampness. So that enhances the reverb sound, the reflections. I got a fairly long tail, 2 seconds on this. And then what I want to do is I want to hear the initial transient when you hit the note on the Telecaster, and then I want the long tail. So I put a substantial pre-delay on it. But I did one other thing. I put a compressor on this Tele effect channel. And here's how I set this up. I set this compressor up to be side chained to the original dry Tele signal. What does that mean? When the Tele hits those initial transients, it's triggering the compression, and what's being compressed is not the guitar. What's being compressed is this reverb. You see the compression happening. Remember, we're not compressing the guitar, we're compressing the reverb. But the dry guitar signal is triggering this because we side chained it there. And the net result is it's letting the initial transient, that first note or two, come through. And then we have that big long tail. Let's bring the other instruments in and see what this sounds like. All right, that's the Tele And the last piece is going to be the vocals. We'll do that next. Okay, we'll be working on the vocals now. And just as we did with the previous instruments, the vocal tracks are being sent to this vocal bus. This vocal bus is then being sent to this vocal effects track. And I have a number of time-based effects set up that we can experiment with. Now, my personal preference with vocals is to send a vocal to a little bit of delay and then send that into a room reverb. So here's what the delay looks like. We've got it synced to the tempo of the song. I've got it set at an eighth note to sync with 8 notes. And I have just a little bit of feedback set. I don't want too much. I just want a little bit. So let's engage the vocal bus and hear what this sounds like.
Come on down to
Let's
see
turn
me.
the analog off, the analog delay.
I confess all my mistakes.
There it is, dry.
Won't you take me back?
Turn the delay on.
Oh, come on down.
Then I'm going to
come
send
on
that
down.
in to the room.
Come on down, my only partner.
It's interesting.
Here's
Okay.
the blues.
Let's try something else. The other thing I like to do occasionally is use
Come on down
a
to love
vocal
me.
chamber.
Got an open heart.
This is
for
the chamber
you.
only.
Come on down to see me.
Just the vocal chamber.
I'm sitting here all alone. Come
Let's see what that sounds
on
like if we
down
send
to
a
be
delay
with me.
into it.
I like to hold your hand.
Yeah, it's
Come on
interesting.
down to love me.
Let's
Got an
close
open
that.
heart for you.
We're going to try one other
Sorry,
thing. Let's take
I
this
walked
delay
away. What I
and we're going to
said
send it
I never do.
into a
Can you
plate.
ever forgive me? I'd never stop loving you. Come on down to love me.
So we've got the delay going into
Got
the
an
plate.
open heart for you.
I'm going to do one more thing. We're going to send that whole thing into the room reverb.
I'd do anything just to hold you in my arms.
I think that's what we're going to go with. Now, at the end of that, what we heard was a really big echo, and that was another little special effect I added. I'm going to go back and revisit that. So I think, it's a matter of taste, but what I'm doing is I'm sending this analog reverb with the short feedback synced to the tempo of the song. We're sending that then into this vocal plate, this plate, not a vocal chamber. We're sending it into this plate reverb. And then that plate reverb is in turn going into this room. So we got delay into the plate into the room, and we'll hear what that sounds like one more time.
Here's the blue.
Oh, you hear that repeat? We're going to talk about that in a minute, too.
Come on down to love me. Got an open heart for you.
Okay, that's what we're going to do with the vocal. Let's close these for a moment and see what that sounds like with the rest of the instruments. This
Come
is
on down to see me. I'm sitting here all alone. Come on down to
I'm going to
be
bring
with
up
me.
the effects on the vocal a little more.
I like to hold your hand. Come on down to love me.
Ooh, I think that was too much.
Got an open heart for you. Sorry, I walked away.
Okay. We're going to go back and revisit some of those other little segments with special effects. All right, now we're going to hear the entire band with all the effects, and I want you to pay particular attention to these little events, which I've segmented out. This first one is on the vocal, where I've added a really big room reverb, and the intent there is to help carry a little bit of that last phrase into this space where no vocal exists, just before the guitar kicks in. Then out here, we've got some event delay. Let's listen.
Oh, I do anything.
Here's the big reverb coming up.
Just to hold you in my arms.
So all you heard there was that wash, that big tail at the end. Hold you in my arms. Kind of subtle, but it fills a little bit of the gap in the mix. Now these next two instances, we're going to apply some delay for an effect we call a vocal throw, where we sing the phrase and then it's repeated.
Come on down to see me. I confess all my mistakes. Won't you take me back? Oh, come on down, come on down, come on down. Come on down, my only partner. Here's the blue. Come on down to love me. Got an open heart for you.
Okay, that does it for applying effects to the tracks. Now we're going to come back and do one last effect, and that's going to be on the entire mix. Let's glue this mix together. You may have heard of that term. You know, what is it? And the question is, how do we use it? How do we do it? You know, we have a dilemma in mixing. We like to hear each instrument, but we also want them to fit together in a cohesive mix. So what do? During the tracking and mixing, we do a lot to separate. We change track levels, panning, compression, EQ, and effects, all to separate these tracks. But now to finish the mix, we need to bring it all together so it sounds like a finished song. Now, a track can be like this, with all the separate instruments all playing along, but standing alone in a sense, each holding their own ground. And the more we add, each one is adding more and more individual elements, each sitting on the mix. What we want it to be is like this, where it sits in the mix rather than on the mix, and that's what we refer to as the glue. So we're going to now see if we can use some of these time-based effects to glue the mix together. All right, we're bringing this to conclusion, and now we're going to try to apply glue to the final mix, and we'll be working way out over here and the main bus where all these tracks and effects and everything roll up here. And typically, when folks want to apply glue to a mix, they're reaching for something like an SSL compressor, a bus compressor, like this one. So we're going to try that first, and I use that quite frequently myself. So let's pull up the tracks and listen to that compressor. Listen carefully as I turn it on and off. On.
An open heart for you. Oh, I
Off.
do anything just to hold you in my arms.
As you can see, it's doing about 2 or 3 dBs of compression. Turn it off. It's adding just a little bit of glue. It might be a little difficult to hear, but as you can see, just a little compression is just gluing things together. Now, when we're using this kind of compressor, what we need to be aware of is our level, because oftentimes a compressor with makeup gain will add additional volume, additional level, and it'll trick our ears to thinking that it's better. So as an example, I'll dial this makeup gain just a little bit, and you see the after is just a little bit hotter. Look at the numbers down here. When we bring up that makeup gain, the after side is just a little louder. So let's bring that down to where they're both kind of even. Turn that off, and we're going to see what this sounds like if we try to do this with the room reverb. Now keep in mind, the reverb will or shouldn't be adding any additional volume at all, so that shouldn't be an issue. We don't need to watch the level meters. So here it goes. No glue. I'm going to turn on the room reverb.
Come on down, see me.
Now off.
I'm sitting here.
And I'm using a very small room. I don't want a giant reverberative room.
Come down to be with me. I like to hold your hand.
Just a little bit.
Come on down to love me.
Let's compare that to what the SSL does.
Heart for you.
Now that seemed to get a little bit louder. I'm going to dial that makeup gain down a
I
little
walked away. What I said I'd never do. Can you ever
Turn it off.
forgive me? I'd never stop.
Back on.
loving you.
Now we'll do it with the reverb.
Come on down to love me. Got an open heart for you. Oh, I do anything just to hold you in my arms.
Okay, that's a wrap for applying glue. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you found this interesting and helpful in some way. And if you would, please consider subscribing. It helps me a lot. And if you liked it at all, hey, you can buy me a coffee if you'd like. Thanks again. See you soon. Remember, I'm just a guy splaining stuff.